Hey everyone, tonight we're slipping into a world where a single sip could betray you, where the bitter steam rising from a cup might carry more danger than a dagger hidden in the dark. You push open the carved wooden door of an Ottoman coffee house, the hinges groaning softly like they know you shouldn't be here. The room is thick with smoke sweet, spiced, clinging to your skin, while men in turbans lean close, their voices low, their laughter sharp, their eyes darting to the corners as if expecting spies in the shadows. It looks harmless, almost cozy, yet every cup here is a risk. You probably won't survive this if you forget one thing. In this place, the coffee isn't just a drink, it's a weapon. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love knowing who else is awake when history is at its strangest. Now, turn down the lights, turn on the fan to some soothing music, and let's get going tonight. The first thing that hits you isn't the taste, but the sound, the sharp rattle of dice across a wooden board, the metallic scrape of a spoon against a copper cup, the burst of laughter that feels half like joy and half like defiance. Imagine a tavern without wine, but with a sharper edge, a place where the drink itself keeps you awake long enough to talk yourself into rebellion. You slide onto a low wooden bench, the cushion worn thin, and the man beside you barely nods as he pours thick, dark liquid into a tiny porcelain cup, painted with faded blue swirls. The scent rises up bitter, earthy, layered with the faint sweetness of cardamom, and for a moment you almost relax. But then you notice the silence that falls whenever someone unfamiliar walks through the door. Every gesture here is coded. A cough to end a story, a glance toward the entrance to signal caution, a hand placed over a cup to show loyalty or suspicion. Historians still debate whether these rituals were real signals of conspiracy or just nervous habits. But one thing is certain, the authorities feared coffee more than any sword. You feel the weight of that paranoia in the way the lamp flames flicker, as if even the fire is listening. Strange stories cling to this place, like steam. One old man swears he knew a dervish who claimed coffee could open visions of angels, while another insists he saw a janissary drink 12 cups before rushing out into the street to challenge his commander. Someone laughs at the idea, slapping the table so hard the cups tremble. But the joke lands heavy, because everyone here knows men have died for less. The oddest detail is that the punishment wasn't always exile or a fine. Sometimes it was something more theatrical. There's a tale of a sultan who, determined to terrify his subjects, had a man sewn into a leather bag and tossed into the Bosporus for daring to sip in secret. Whether true or not, the story makes your hands shake as you lift the cup. The liquid is still hot, and as it touches your lips, it burns. But the flavor floods your mouth with such intensity that you forget your fear for a moment. Then the whispers return, crawling along the walls. A young man in the corner leans forward, eyes shining, speaking about poets banned from court, about soldiers paid late, about the possibility, just the possibility, that things could change if people stayed awake long enough to talk about it. You glance at the door again, half expecting guards to rush in. And that's the strange thing. This place isn't hidden. It's right here on a busy street, its smoke curling out into the night for everyone to see, yet stepping inside feels like crossing into a forbidden dimension where words carry more weight than swords. You sip again, your heart racing faster than the caffeine can explain, and you realize this isn't just about the drink. It's about the space, the air heavy, with secrets, the courage or foolishness of men who think a shared story could topple an empire. And in this moment, surrounded by heat, laughter, and the ever-present risk of betrayal, you're part of it too. You lean back, the taste of bitterness still on your tongue, And it isn't just the coffee making your pulse thrum faster. It's the weight of history pressing into your ribs as whispers wrap around the smoky room like serpents. Tonight you hear the truth that no one dares to write down, that coffee wasn't simply a drink in the Ottoman Empire, but a battlefield disguised as a tavern. The sultans themselves loved it, or at least couldn't resist its pull, yet the same. Rulers ordered raids on these very houses, breaking clay cups and dragging men out into the street like criminals. Imagine the contradiction. The palace kitchens filled with copper pots of boiling kava, while soldiers prowled the city searching for civilians who dared to sip the same brew. It's almost comical, like banning chocolate while sneaking a stash into your own desk drawer, except here the stakes were sharper: exile, torture, sometimes even death. Historians still debate whether Murad IV truly patrolled the streets himself at night, disguised in plain clothes to catch offenders, but the legend is repeated often enough that you glance nervously toward the doorway every time it creaks. Murad is said to have carried a sword beneath his robes, not a cup, and with one stroke he could cut down a man caught with so much as a steaming breath curling from his lips. Yet the irony? Coffee never lost its grip on the empire. The bands came and went, but the aroma always crept back through the alleys, stronger than fear, clinging to wool cloaks and seeping into the cracks of the palace itself. You picture the Sultan himself pausing over a cup in the morning, steam rising into his face, while outside his guards beat merchants for selling the same thing. This was the absurd theater of power, where rulers tried to dictate not only laws and taxes, but also what entered your body and how long your mind could stay awake. And maybe that's why the suspicion grew so fierce. A wakeful citizen is a dangerous citizen. You can almost hear the thoughts of those rulers. Better to keep the people sleepy, dull, wrapped in wine haze, and sharp-eyed and buzzing at midnight with ideas about justice and reform. The strangest part is that coffee itself was seen as almost magical. Some chroniclers claimed it sharpened with like a whetstone against steel. Others warned it bred arrogance and disobedience. A chronicler in the 16th century sneered at coffee. Drinkers sat around pretending to be philosophers, their heads filled with smoke rather than wisdom. But still he admitted the drink had a grip unlike anything before. And then comes the oddest detail of all. In some places, women weren't allowed inside these houses, but in others, wives used coffee as leverage. One folktale insists that in Istanbul, a wife could divorce her husband if he failed to provide her with a steady supply of beans. Imagine it: entire marriages, balanced on the bitter edge of a cup. You glance back around the room, and the laughter now sounds like defiance. Men smirking as they speak half-truths about taxes, armies, corrupt officials. Each story is coated in jest, like honey around medicine, but the danger is still there, humming beneath every word. The ban makes the taste sweeter somehow, like sneaking candy after bedtime. Only here the punishment isn't a scolding, it's exile or worse. Yet the more rulers struck down on it, the more the drink spread, slipping across the Bosporus, sailing toward Europe, tripping into poetry and trade contracts alike. The candlelight flickers as you sip again, and you think about the sultans. Paranoia about the way an empire feared a bean more than a blade. And the truth settles heavy. It wasn't really the drink they feared at all. It was the thought that you could stay awake long enough to see the cracks in the empire's mask. The coffee doesn't just keep you alert. It teaches you to question, to mock, to scheme, and in the quiet of the night, to whisper truths that no sultan could control. The cup trembles slightly in your hand, not from fear this time, but from the sheer anticipation of where the story carries you. Back to a time before the Ottoman bans, before the smoky rooms of Istanbul, back to the highlands of Ethiopia, where legend insists it all began. You picture a goatherd named Kaldi, his animals prancing and bleating with strange energy after nibbling bright red berries from a wild shrub. The story goes that Kaldi himself tasted the fruit and felt a rush of vitality, like lightning humming, through his veins, enough to keep him awake long past the sunset. It sounds almost cartoonish, like an ancient advertisement. Eat these berries and stay up all night. But the tale refuses to die, retold by every traveler who wanted to sound worldly. Historians still debate whether Kaldi was real or just a myth tacked on centuries later. But the image of goats dancing in the moonlight on a rocky hillside is too charming to discard. And from those hills, the story slides eastward across the Red Sea to Yemen, where monks and mystics first boiled those beans into something that looked much closer to the drink you now hold. In the port city of Mocha, the brew became both prayer, aid, and social glue, fueling long nights of chanting, meditation, and whispered theological disputes that probably sounded less holy after the third or fourth cup. Imagine monks wide-eyed at dawn, not because of divine visions, but because they had essentially invented the medieval equivalent of a double espresso. You could almost smell it, the mix of desert air, incense, and a thick, bitter aroma rising from clay pots. What makes it more bizarre is how quickly suspicion followed. Religious authorities in Yemen, much like their Ottoman counterparts later, worried that this strange drink blurred lines between sacred and profane. Was it a tool for devotion or for debauchery? Was it holy energy or sinful intoxication? The arguments grew so heated that rulers tried banning it there too, only to realize the bans created more chaos than the coffee itself. The odd detail that slips through is how some scholars argued coffee caused headaches and heartburn, while others swore it could cure nearly every ailment from melancholy to gout. That's the thing with new substances. They arrive carrying both miracles and monsters in equal measure. You picture caravans loading sacks of beans in Mocha, merchants squinting against the desert sun as they tightened ropes around their cargo, knowing that each bag was worth more than gold in the right city. The drink spread along the pilgrim routes, toward Mecca, into Cairo, Damascus, and eventually the Ottoman world, gathering myths and enemies at every stop. And in each new place, it took on local flavor. Mixed with spices in one, sweetened with honey in another, served with dates or bread, or just scalding hot and black. You laugh to yourself, thinking how little has changed. People today still argue endlessly over whether coffee should be sweetened, spiced, or left pure. The continuity is almost comforting, like we've been having the same cafe arguments for 500 years. But what lingers in your mind is the way coffee was tied to sleeplessness from the very start. It was never about relaxation. It was about staying awake long enough to pray, to study, to argue, to plan. That sense of wakefulness became its signature, its danger, and its gift. You sip again and think about the irony that a handful of beans in Ethiopia could spark suspicion in Cairo, bans in Yemen, paranoia in Istanbul, and eventually revolutions in Europe. The candle beside you pops and sputters, as if it too resents the idea of men staying awake beyond its natural flame. And as you set your cup down, you realize this isn't just a drink with a taste. It's a thread pulling you through centuries. Each sip a doorway, each swallow another secret that no one dares to speak too loudly. The candle gutters low, and with it, your imagination pulls you down the winding alleys of Cairo, a city alive with noise, dust, and the thick perfume of spice markets, where the sound of merchants calling out their wares mixes with the cries of camels and the pounding rhythm of drums. Tonight you find yourself stumbling into a stall where smoke rises in lazy ribbons, and the bitter, almost burnt aroma tells you this is no ordinary shop. It is one of the earliest coffee houses of Cairo. And here the story turns wild. The men sit cross-legged on woven mats, their cups steaming in the heat, and the tension is as heavy as the desert air. Because here the drink is more than a luxury, it's a spark. and sparks have a way of setting cities on fire. Historians still debate whether the first bans on coffee in Cairo were about public health, morality, or pure fear of people thinking too much. But one thing is certain: riots followed. Imagine it, whole crowds gathering in the streets, not for bread or gold, but for the right to sip from a cracked clay cup. Preachers thundered from the pulpits, their voices echoing through the alleys, declaring that this strange black liquid was the work of the devil, that it made men unruly, kept them awake, tempted them into gossip, gambling, and worse. And yet, at the very same time, scholars who had tasted it in Yemen whispered that it sharpened the mind, that it was a gift from heaven to keep the faithful vigilant through endless nights of devotion. Which side was right? The crowd never seemed to care. They loved the drink, and every time a ruler tried to close the coffee stalls, the people simply opened new ones in secret, slipping into back rooms where clay burners hissed and cups clinked in the dark. You sit in one now, the smoke so thick you can barely see the man across from you, but his voice carries like a blade. He's railing against the governor, mocking tax collectors, and for a moment, the whole room erupts in laughter so sharp it feels like rebellion. The oddest detail here is how quickly the authorities tried to pin coffee on everything they feared. One chronicler claimed that the riots weren't about injustice or hunger, but because the citizens were overstimulated by the bean. Another insisted that marriages crumbled because wives couldn't pull their husbands out of the coffee house. You smirk into your cup, because even now you can picture modern arguments over people glued to cafe tables for hours, and you realize some complaints never change. But in Cairo, the consequences were harsher. Stalls smashed, men whipped in public, beans burned in great bonfires, meant to scare the crowd into obedience. The flames lit the night, sparks flying into the same sky, where prayers rose from minarets, and the city held its breath between devotion and defiance. You imagine standing in that crowd, the smell of roasting beans mingling with smoke and sweat, and you can't help but feel the pull of contradiction. Something so small, so ordinary, turning into the axis of rebellion. And just as you think, it couldn't grow more dramatic, you hear the rumor whispered in the corner that certain imams were secretly drinking coffee themselves, cloaked in the dark, using the very energy they condemned to draft their sermons. Hypocrisy never smelled so bitter, and you laugh softly, though you know you shouldn't. The truth that no one dares to say aloud is clear now. The fear was never about the drink itself, but about what people became when they shared it louder, braver, more willing to mock the untouchable. And as you take another sip, the heat burns down your throat, and you realize Cairo wasn't just a city of markets and mosques. It was the stage where coffee first revealed itself as more than a drink, as a rebellion dressed in steam and clay. Cups daring you to stay awake long enough to hear the forbidden whispers. The smoke of Cairo drifts away, and suddenly you're following the creak of caravan wheels, the shuffle of camels, the endless stretch of dust and wind along the silk. Routes where the beans themselves became contraband, tucked away in leather sacks like stolen treasure. You walk alongside merchants whose eyes glitter with secrets, men who know that each bag of coffee is worth more than its weight in silver once it reaches a new city. The desert sun beats down, the air shimmering, and yet the traders guard there. Cargo like it is more dangerous than opium or salt. Historians still debate whether Ottoman merchants deliberately boiled beans to prevent rivals from sprouting new plants, or whether those stories were exaggerated by jealous Europeans. But either way, the sense of conspiracy clings to every cup. Picture it. By night, a fire crackles, and the merchants huddle close, sipping their brew, their voices rising not with songs, but with gossip news of wars, tales of uprisings, rumors about sultans, generals and poets alike. Each sip seems to loosen tongues, and the desert becomes an open-air parliament where empire-shaking secrets slip between gulps of bitter liquid. The oddest detail is how often coffee was smuggled, not only in sacks, but in disguise. Mixed with spices to throw off customs officers, hidden under fabrics, even disguised as animal feed. Imagine some poor inspector thrusting his hand into a sack, expecting dates or wheat, only to pull out the sharp aroma of roasted beans. It must have felt like catching a spark before it turned into flame. You walk into one of these caravanserais now, stone walls echoing with laughter, and you can almost hear the debates swirling. A Persian merchant swears the Safavids will never fall, while an Arab traveler counters that the Ottomans grow restless and powerful. In a corner, a poet mutters verses under his breath, inspired by the smoke curling from his cup, verses he dares not publish, but happily whispers to strangers. Under the cover of night, you think to yourself how dangerous it is that words travel faster than camels when fueled by caffeine. And yet, the more bans and crackdowns came, the more the beans moved hidden in saddlebags, tucked into spice jars, packed into the folds of a rug. It was almost comical, like a game of cat and mouse. Only here the stakes weren't a few coins, but the flow of an idea. The idea that people could gather without priests or sultans, that they could share space, laughter, and rebellion. In the same breath, the smell inside the caravanserai is a stew of sweat, horsehair, roasted beans, and cardamom, and it clings to your clothes as you sit among them. Someone passes you a cup, dark and strong, and as it touches your lips, you realize this drink has traveled further than armies, crossing mountains and deserts with more persistence than any conqueror. And yet, in its wake, it leaves a trail of suspicion. A story drifts across the table. In Damascus, officials smashed an entire marketplace of cups, fearing the crowds that gathered there. In Mecca, riots erupted when authorities tried to close the stalls. In Aleppo, the first European traders got their taste and sent frantic letters home demanding more. You sip, and the bitterness fills your chest, and you know that the silk routes were never just about silk or spices. They were about the invisible movement of ideas, carried on the back of camels, hidden in the dust of roads, whispered in the smoky dark of coffee fires. The merchants laugh, their voices echoing through the stone walls, but underneath you sense the pulse of danger, the knowledge that any guard could burst in, that at dawn these men will scatter to different horizons, carrying both beans and secrets with them. And you, sitting here in the heart of it, can't shake the thought that this drink, this ordinary dark liquid, has already done more to unite strangers and spread whispers than any empire decree could ever hope to silence. The desert fades, the caravan wheels dissolve into the sound of church bells, and suddenly you're standing on the stone-paved docks of Venice, the air thick with brine, tar, and the strange bitter aroma of beans that have just arrived from Ottoman ports. Here, the story shifts from secrecy to spectacle, because Europeans didn't just adopt coffee, they staged it, dressed it in lace and gilt, and then promptly panicked about its power. You walk through narrow alleys where merchants shout prices, past masked revelers still drunk on wine, and into a new kind of chamber, the Venetian Kafk. Inside, candlelight gleams on mirrors, porcelain cups clink, and powdered wigs nod as men in silk coats argue over philosophy, commerce, and the latest scandal. Imagine the shock. A single coin bought you a seat at the table, a steaming drink, and access to the same conversations as dukes and scholars. That's why they called these places penny universities. You didn't need tuition. You just needed a coin and a taste for caffeine. Historians still debate whether the Pope's famous baptism of coffee really happened, that Clement VIII supposedly tasted the drink, declared it too delicious for Muslims alone, and sanctified it for Christians. But the tale spread like wildfire, making the drink sound more like a divine loophole than a beverage. Oddly enough, some critics in Europe echoed the old complaints from Cairo, muttering that coffee made men too talkative, too critical, too quick to question authority. You can almost hear the grumbles of monarchs muttering into their wine goblets, furious that their subjects were staying awake long enough to plot. And plot they did. In London, coffee houses mushroomed by the hundreds, each one a hub of debate, speculation, and rumor. You step inside one on a foggy night, the floor sticky, the windows clouded, the chatter relentless. Sailors talk shipping routes, merchants speculate on stocks, poets scrawl verses by candlelight, and in the corner, a man whispers that the king's new tax will never stand. The oddest detail? Lloyd's of London, one of the world's great insurance. Markets began as nothing more than a coffee house where men talked about shipping risks over steaming cups. Out of gossip grew empires of finance. You sip your own cup now, a little thinner than the Ottoman brew, but still sharp, and you realize the taste carries more than caffeine. It carries conspiracy, ambition, revolution. Vienna comes next, its own legend blooming after the Ottoman. Siege of 1683, when sacks of beans were supposedly abandoned by retreating troops. One clever man roasted them, opened a shop, and the city fell in love. Whether the story is exaggerated or not, it is retold endlessly, because it makes coffee sound like the spoils of victory, the taste of triumph distilled into porcelain cups. And yet the paranoia never disappeared. In France, royal edicts tried to restrict coffee, fearing the smoky rooms where Parisians muttered about liberty and equality. In England, King Charles II attempted to suppress coffee houses altogether, declaring them seminaries of sedition. But the backlash was so fierce, he abandoned the plan within days. You grin into your cup, imagining monarchs trembling not. Before armies, but before men with ink-stained fingers and too much caffeine. The smell of roasted beans fills the room, mixed with damp wool coats and candle wax, and you realize Europe had found its addiction. The joke practically writes itself. What did revolutions, stock markets, and encyclopedias have in common? Too much coffee. You lean back, the clatter of cups echoing in your ears, and it dawns on you that the same paranoia once felt in Cairo and Istanbul now thrummed in Venice, London, and Paris. Rulers feared that their subjects might stay awake too long, think too sharply, dream too boldly. And so, in every corner of Europe, the coffee house became more than a cafe. It was a crucible where bitter liquid boiled into dangerous ideas, where laughter could turn into manifesto, where steam, rising from a cup, smelled faintly, irresistibly, like revolution. The mirror glass of Venice shatters in your mind, and you find yourself back in a smoky Ottoman chamber, the lamps low, the voices hushed, the air so heavy with steam and spice you can barely breathe. This time the coffee house is not laughter and games, but a mask, a stage where every gesture hides a second meaning, where a raised eyebrow can signal loyalty and a spilled drop of liquid might mean betrayal. You feel the tension the moment you step inside men in cloaks pressed against the walls, poets muttering verses under their breath, merchants whispering numbers that sound less like trade and more like codes. Here, coffee is the costume. Smoke the curtain, and behind it all hums the danger of power. Historians still debate whether true secret societies plotted in these rooms, or if it was paranoia spun by nervous sultans. But one thing is certain, the rulers believed it. They sent spies disguised as beggars, informants hiding as servants, even janissaries who sipped silently in corners, waiting for someone to speak too boldly. And when they caught whispers of disloyalty, the punishment was brutal raids at midnight. Cups overturned, poets dragged into the street, their verses left unfinished on the wooden tables. Yet still the people returned, still the lamps burned, still the cups clinked. The oddest detail is how often poets and musicians were tolerated in these spaces, even encouraged, because art was seen as harmless until suddenly it wasn't. A simple ballad about longing might be twisted into an anthem of rebellion, a satire about love suddenly sounding like mockery of the court. You sit there now, cup in hand, listening as a young man strums a lute and sings about caged birds. The crowd chuckles softly, but you feel the double meaning, the weight of defiance hidden in rhyme, and you know the Sultan's ears would hear. Treason in every note. The smoke thickens, someone opens the door, and a gust of cold air sends shadows flickering across the walls. Every head turns. Is it a guard? An informant? No, only another customer, but the way the room breathes out tells you how close the fear lives under the surface. And yet, isn't that the thrill? You sip, the liquid hot against your lips, and you can feel the adrenaline mingle with the caffeine. A mix as dangerous as gunpowder. They say even janissaries, the fiercest soldiers of the empire, sometimes gathered in these rooms, their armor left outside, their words sharper than their swords. Imagine the risk of that warriors, whose loyalty was already suspect, trading jokes and grievances over porcelain cups. It's enough to make any ruler shiver in his throne. But perhaps the most haunting part is the thought that these houses didn't just brew coffee, they brewed possibility. Each night, the city became a stage for secrets, a rehearsal for change, a theater where men tried on the mask of freedom, even if only for a few hours before dawn. And you, sitting here in the half-dark, can almost hear the heartbeat of empire trembling under the clatter of dice, the scrape of a chair, a hiss of coffee poured too quickly. The room feels alive, dangerous, yet irresistible, and the truth presses against your chest. Sometimes the strongest army isn't built of swords or muskets, but of men with sharpened minds, wide-open eyes, and cups of bitter liquid that taste faintly, irresistibly, of rebellion. The smoke clears just enough for you to see the truth, and it feels heavier than the thick porcelain cup in your hand. The Ottoman coffee house was never about the drink alone. It was about the theater of danger, the forbidden thrill that clung to every swallow. You step out into the midnight streets of Istanbul, the air damp with salt from the Bosporus, and the laughter from inside follows you like a haunting echo. Somewhere a muezzin's call drifts over the rooftops, mingling with the hush of waves, but in your ears it sounds less like prayer and more like a warning. You pause at the corner and glance back at the coffee house, its windows glowing faintly, smoke curling into the night like signals. Inside those walls, men gamble with words sharper than steel, and you can't help but think that what they truly brewed was not coffee at all, but rebellion. Historians still debate whether coffee houses alone could destabilize empires or whether they were only the stage on which deeper grievances were performed, but no one denies the fear they inspired in rulers. Think about it. If a sultan needed to patrol the streets in disguise, if governors banned beans with more fervor than alcohol, if poets were jailed for rhymes spoken over steaming cups, then clearly something more than caffeine was at stake. And here lies the oddest detail. Many rulers themselves could not resist. Behind palace walls, servants roasted beans, poured them into gilded cups, and offered them to the very men who condemned their subjects for doing the same. The hypocrisy was almost comedic, if it weren't so dangerous, a reminder that power always tastes bitter when mixed with fear. You wander further into the alley, the cobblestones slick beneath your feet, and the night feels alive, as though every shadow hides another whisper, another secret, carried on the breath of coffee. You imagine a sultan in his chamber, restless, awake at dawn not from dreams, but from a cup too many, his mind racing with suspicion about what was said in smoky rooms he could not control. You picture wives demanding beans as part of their dowry, merchants smuggling sacks under spices, scholars scribbling frantic notes by candlelight, their quills scratching like conspirators plotting in code. And you realized that the truth no one dared say aloud was simple. The coffee house had become a mirror, reflecting everything an empire wished to hide. In those smoky rooms, men could laugh at power, mock officials, dream of change, and for a few hours each night, they felt free. No sword could cut through that kind of freedom. No edict could silence it. Because once you've tasted the bitter clarity of staying awake, sleep feels like surrender. The irony is that centuries later, the same drink is taken for granted, sold in paper cups with names scrawled in marker, its danger forgotten. But here, in this moment, in this city of whispers and shadows, the liquid in your cup is alive with rebellion, and you feel the pulse of history in every swallow. You take one last sip, the flavor burning down your throat, and it tastes not just of beans and smoke, but of danger, ritual, and truth. The lamp above flickers, the street falls silent, and you understand. This isn't just the story of coffee, it's the story of courage, of people daring to speak when silence was demanded, of ideas too strong to be drowned even in blood. And as you close your eyes, the steam rising from the cup blurs the world around you, until all that remains is the hum of voices, the laughter of defiance, and the lingering taste of rebellion on your tongue. Now, slow your breath. Imagine the streets emptying, the lamps fading, the smoke dissolving into the cool night air. Picture the Bosporus glimmering under the moon, each ripple softer than the last, the city's noise quieting into a lullaby. Let the steam of that final cup drift upward, curling into nothing, until even the whispers fade. Your body grows heavy, your eyes grow warm, and the story that kept you awake begins to blur at the edges. Let go of the danger, let go of the laughter, let go of the rebellion. What remains is only calm, the slow rhythm of waves, the gentle hush of night wrapping around you. Sleep takes the cup from your hand and sets it aside, and you are free to rest, safe in the silence. End of script. Good night.